Hello everyone, please take a seat where you can. Just clicked over 12 o'clock. So welcome to the State Library. My name's Mark Gilbert. I'm the exhibitions librarian here at the State Library of South Australia, and we're going to talk about one of my favourite subjects. First, the State Library acknowledges this land that we meet on today is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting from other areas of South Australia or Australia. I've got the picture there and I've got the picture there, but I've got to keep looking at this one, I'm told. Last year I gave a talk called Departed Spirits, the Lost Pubs of Adelaide. And I limited it to just the square mile of Adelaide, the pubs that no longer exist, such as this one, the Tavistock Hotel. These photos were taken the outside in the 1920s and the inside in the 1950s. This was on the corner of Rundle Street and Frome Street, basically where the mural is now. So the street was widened and this beautiful building was knocked over. I knew there were a lot of other stories to tell, and I was going to mention a couple of city pubs that I missed last year, but I got so immersed in the pubs of North Adelaide and Port Adelaide, not for the first time, so that I've decided to stick to them. Some of the pubs no longer echo with the sound of bar chatter and clinking glasses, no longer emit the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke, and are no longer run by bar staff with a raised eyebrow. I'm not going to be looking in depth at the general history of hotels or liquor licensing in South Australia, what is the oldest establishment, or who came up with the butcher glass. Instead, I'll be presenting stories of what happened in the hotels themselves. The SP illegal betting, serving drinks after hours, lurk merchants and larrikins. These stories come from the newspapers of the time. And so the journalists in this pre-mass media period were very descriptive and fulsome in their articles. They described in great detail. They also had a clear eye for the amusing and the absurd. You know, some of the incidents were quite serious, but others were almost petty. And you wonder about the amount of time that the police and the courts put into prosecuting some of these cases. What we would think of as very small matters. So to get a feel of Adelaide in times gone by, here's a bird's eye view of Adelaide around 1884. So you can see the city, you can see North Adelaide, and of course the area leading out to Port Adelaide. Also Glenelg down there, and a little bit at Henley as well, but just how open the land is going out to the port in particular. In 1936, so the centenary of South Australia, W.H. Edmonds made this map of the city and North Adelaide and shows all the important places, so libraries, churches, hospitals and pubs. Now this is North Adelaide, and he showed 12 hotels in North Adelaide, but I've noticed that he missed the Queen's Head in Commode Street. But I think we can forgive him because it's such a beautiful map. And this is the Queen's Head on Commode Street. In 1845, from a sketch by S.T. Gill, the Queen's Head is right at the centre of the picture, opened in 1838, and is one of the oldest surviving buildings in Adelaide, and reputed to be the oldest hotel in South Australia that's partly in its original building. That's a closer view of that building there. In 1839, August the 20th, it was reported, an audacious robbery took place at the Queen's Head. William Smith was placed at the bar, charged with having stolen from the counter of Mr. Giles Abbott landlord of the Queen's Head, a box containing notes and silver. It appeared from the evidence of Mr. Abbott and two of his sons that on the morning of the above day, the prisoner came to the bar and asked for a pint of rum. That's just a heart starter, I think. For payment of which he tendered a sovereign. And Mr. Abbott gave him change from the box. And then the prisoner asked for a glass of porter. So I'm assuming his rum was takeaway. And while Mr. Abbott turned his back to draw it, the tin box was abstracted from the counter. The prisoner was the only person in the bar at the time. So when Mr. Abbott returned with the porter, he didn't notice it straight away. But after the prisoner had drunk his drink and left the house, he began to move the glasses and missed his box of money. He looked under the counter, thinking he might have put it there, but he couldn't find it. And he immediately ran to one of his sons, who went in pursuit of the prisoner, and on his way was joined by his brother. They overtook the prisoner about a quarter of a mile from where the robbery was committed. I like to think that was at Adelaide Oval, which of course wasn't built yet. And they taxed him with the theft, which he denied. Thomas Abbott asked if he knew who was in his father's bar at the time, and the prisoner answered, "If you think I have robbed you, search me." This appeared to be before anything whatever was said about the robbery, so he's basically giving himself away. So Giles Abbott, the other of the sons, observed something under the prisoner's arm, or had observed it, and they thought that he'd placed it in the hollow of a tree, so they went back there and found the box. So once again, they chased after the prisoner. The other called to Jones, the constable, who just happened to be in his garden close by. And with his assistance, the prisoner was apprehended. The box was found to contain £54, 5 shillings and sixpence, so a large sum of money. And the South Australian Register actually reported that the prisoner, who appeared to treat the matter with the utmost nonchalance, cross-examined the prosecutor and witnesses in the most impudent manner, and afterwards made a statement which was rather corroborative than otherwise of the depositions made against him. So here's the Queen's Head in 1935. So it doesn't look much different today. I don't think it has that West End lager sign though anymore. The Scotch Thistle. On the southeast corner of Commode and John Street in 1923. John Street's now called King William Road. Established originally on the north side of Commode Street in 1850, but the licence was changed in 1881 and moved across the road. And it changed its name to the Cathedral Hotel in 1925, and that's its name today. In 1918, there was a remarkable case. The headline in the Truth newspaper reported across Australia, "Coppers copped, brace of bobbies committed." If you want some fun, go on Trove and look up the Truth newspaper, because their headlines are just hilarious, one after the other. But what happened in 1918 at the Adelaide Police Court on Wednesday, George White and John Farrer, police constables, were charged with having on October 4th entered the Scotch Thistle Hotel and stolen liquor valued at £14 and £22 in money. The prosecution said, unfortunately, at the time of the offences, the accused were members of the police force. Terrible. The robbery occurred after 2 a.m. Mr. Opie, who managed the hotel for his wife, had securely locked the doors and windows except for one window leading to the billiard room. He put the till containing the cash in the storeroom near the dining room. Now, Detective Martin, who was looking into all of this, said that at about 2 p.m. on October the 9th, he interviewed White at the North Adelaide Police Station, and he mentioned several robberies that occurred in the district, and that he had good reason to believe that White had some of the stolen goods at his home. White said he was willing to allow the detectives to search his house at Prospect, and a wooden box was discovered. White unlocked the box, which contained 6 bottles of spirits. Asked where the goods came from, he admitted that they were from the Scotch Thistle Hotel. He refused to say who was with him when he stole the liquor, adding, and I really like what he says here, he's not giving his mate away, he says, "I am mongrel enough for what I have done, but I can't settle one of my own mates." But it didn't do Farrer any good, because Detective Martin visited Farrer's house in Medindi, found a small box containing a number of silver coins, and And Farah said that Wyatt gave the money to him in a bag, and in the bathroom also contained money, which Farah said Wyatt had given him. He tried to get away with saying that they'd bought a pony and trap together. When asked whether he knew where Wyatt obtained the money and spirits, he replied, "Yes, I knew it afterwards." And Wyatt received 4 years with hard labour, and Farah 3 years with hard labour. I don't imagine it would have been much fun being police in jail. There's the Cathedral Hotel, taken in 1937, so it looks a bit more recognisable to what we know now. So we'll just make out we've walked past the British Hotel, and we've come to the Lion Hotel. Here it is in the 1880s. It was first licensed in 1881, so it became the Old Lion, some of us may remember, in 1972. But this is shown on Jerningham Street, where the Lion Brewery was. And this is looking at it from Melbourne Street, with the trams going down Melbourne Street. In 1910, in 1933, police found some very mysterious goings-on at the hotel. The headline was "Hid in Hotel Cellar." How George Carter, barman of the Lion Hotel in Melbourne Street, Lower North Adelaide, was found locked in the cellar of a hotel on December 17th and had been recording bets transmitted to him from the bar by means of an electric light conduit, was told in the Adelaide Police Court today. Carter pleaded guilty to a charge of having been on the premises of the hotel for the purpose of unlawful betting, and he was fined £60. This is in 1933, which was 10 times the basic wage in those days, and 15 shillings cost. And if he didn't pay, it was 2 months in jail. Plainclothes constables visited the hotel at 1:30 on December 17th, and they forced a trapdoor in the bar and saw Carter in the cellar below. He must have got a bit of a surprise, I think. When Carter was asked why he was locked in the cellar, he replied that he'd been bottling wine there. Pencils were found in his pocket. There were no signs of bottling wine having been done. Betting slips were found in the cellar. He denied that the entries on them were in his writing. Prosecution said that parts of the slips were charred in an attempt to burn them. Matches were found on the cellar floor. He gave a sample of his writing, which was very similar to the betting slips, and I think that's when he decided to plead guilty. The bookmaker in the bar above had communicated with Carter by means of the conduit pipe, so the secret code. It was said to be in favour of Carter that he pleaded guilty. I think he realised he was banged to rights. So we'll go past the Lord Melbourne and the Kentish, and we'll kind of go back around to the Dover Castle. You'll notice some of our photos are a bit later, and they come from what we call our messenger press collection, so photographs from the messenger press. So I think this photograph's from the 1990s. So established in 1850, the building was remodelled in the 1890s and circa 1914. And the building remains, I'm pleased to say, but the hotel ceased trading in early 2000. In 1932, the headline says, "Fined £25 for having occupied gaming house." James Burrows, husband of the licensee of the Dover Castle Hotel, pleaded guilty in the Adelaide Police Court today to having been occupier of a common gaming house on October the 5th, and he was fined £25 with 15 shillings cost. The prosecutor said that the betting slips were hidden in a bath heater. And the defence lawyer, this is an interesting thing, his defence lawyer, I don't know if he was a very good defence lawyer, he said the defence lawyer said that his client was not a bookmaker, but was acting as an agent for one. The Huntsman Hotel, established in 1849 and traded until 1960 when the licence was transferred to the Hotel Australia. Some of us might remember the Hotel Australia. This building, which dates from 1882, A lot of the time the pubs were open, say in the 1840s and 50s, but in the 1880s, a lot of building work went done, and that was done, and so these two-storey pubs were starting to be built in the 1870s and 80s. After 1960, when it was closed, it had a number of uses, and including, believe it or not, the Lutheran Church Library. But I don't want to insult any Lutherans in the audience, but fortunately it opened as a hotel again in 2003, the Archer Hotel. In 1926, unregistered barmaid. Aren't they the most dangerous kind? Rose Crammond, licensee of the Huntsman Hotel, appeared in the Adelaide Police Court this morning on a charge of having, on December 1st, allowed Adelaide Whitwell, who was not registered as a barmaid, to serve liquor, and a fine of £2 was imposed. Defence said that his client had been under the impression that if the licensed person drew the liquor, as in poured it, another person could serve it. The law, however, was the other way around. The unlicensed person could pour it at the bar, but the licensed person had to serve it. No wonder the police were kept busy. Adelaide Whitwell pleaded guilty to the charge of having served liquor in the bar room of the Huntsman, not being registered as a barmaid, and she was fined 10 shillings. That whole idea of the barmaids being registered goes back to 1909, when, so from March 1909 to 1967, a woman was not allowed to serve in the public bar of a hotel in South Australia unless she was directly related to the publican. If unrelated to the publican, the woman could only continue working behind the bar if she had been employed for at least 3 months prior to 23rd of December 1908, when the new Licensing Act was passed. So you couldn't be employed as a new bar person if you were a woman between that period. But there were women who were working at that time in 1908 that continued working well into the 1940s, and I think the 50s as well. And this is the Archer Hotel now, photographed by Jenny Scott, former photographic archivist here at the State Library. I wonder if she's watching at home. I forgot to mention that this is all being streamed, so hello Jenny, if you're watching. The commercial in Twin Street in the 1920s, established in 1850 as the commercial and became the North Adelaide Hotel from 1959 to the 1990s. And you might know it as a Daniel O'Connell Hotel that had a bit of an Irish theme for many years. It's now closed, but I'm pleased to say the building survives. I think it's a private residence just across the road from the North Adelaide branch of the City of Adelaide Library. Now, while we always had illegal betting going on in South Australian pubs and Australian pubs generally, commonly known as starting price bookmaking, or SP for short, during World War II, uniquely among the Australian states, only the South Australian government chose to impose a ban on horse racing entirely from March 1942 to October 1943. So during this time, bookmakers' licences lapsed and betting shops were closed. With how patriotic we were, with most staying closed when racing resumed. This allowed the starting price for SP to flourish in work sites and pubs. Needless to say, it did keep the police busy. In April 1942, the bookmaker was fined £25 with 10 shillings costs in the Adelaide Police Court. William Stevens, munition worker of North Adelaide. I will point out that there was no getting away with anything in those days. The newspapers put your name and placed often your home address, or at least your suburb where you were living. He pleaded guilty, and the prosecutor pointed out that the penalty for the first offence was up to £100, so that's a lot of money. He said Constable White, who was in plain clothes, went into the bar of the commercial about 1:30, and there were about 40 men, and some were studying racing information. So the constable put 5 shillings on Queen Backer and 5 on Penaton, and Stevens, the bookmaker, said to him, "If either of the horses win, I will give your money to the barman, who will give it to you." So the barman was right in on it. Stevens told him that he was formerly employed as a clerk by a licensed bookmaker. And then when he was searched at the watch house, £35 10 shillings in notes was found in his wallet. Defence for Stevens said that when the ban on betting was introduced, Stevens had been practically robbed of his means of livelihood, and he had a wife and 5 small children to look after. It's fair enough, I suppose. But 8 years earlier, it hadn't been a lot different, even when the betting shops were still open, as we find at the Wellington Hotel on Wellington Square in North Adelaide. This photo was taken in 1954, and the building we see here dates from 1885, but the pub itself was opened from 1851. But back to the betting charge. Imprisonment for 28 days without the option of a fine was ordered Jack Randolph Petit of North Adelaide in the police court for having been at the Wellington Hotel for the purpose of unlawful betting. Petit said that he had taken bets to oblige the men at the hotel because a betting shop was some distance away. What a lovely, helpful person he was. Now, we're just going to head down the port now. So here's another bird's eye view. This one's just of Port Adelaide. Again, you can see the open ground as you look back towards Adelaide. This was published in the Illustrated Adelaide News in May 1879. And if you know where to look, there are many pubs that can be seen, as well as places like the Customs House and the Port Dock Railway Station that you can see there. And just how busy with shipping the port was right in there, right in the centre. Now, our photographic collection does go back to the 1840s, but it's very much portraits for those days, very stiff portraits, as you can imagine. I think our earliest one's about 1846. So unfortunately, we don't have a photograph of the delightfully named Hen and Chickens Inn, or North Parade, which was active for 5 or 6 years in the 1840s. But we do have this great 1867 photograph of the Port Admiral on the northeast corner of Commercial Road and St Vincent Street, and you can see the ships right there at the back. In fact, there's a few pubs in there. Got the Commercial, and then you got the... I don't want to preempt things. Once you start looking, you just can't stop. But the Port Admiral was actually established in 1849 as the Railway Hotel and became the Port Admiral Family Hotel, and then simply the Port Admiral the following year. And it's the oldest existing building in the port. There have been some modifications, of course, including the roof line. The hotel was closed in October 2006, but luckily we've had it reopened since 2017. When this photo was taken, Richard Blackler was the licensee, and his name appears right there on the building. And here it is on the left-hand side of this photo. A lot of you might have seen this photo before of Black Diamond Corner in 1950. No wonder people stopped and called in for a drink and just let the traffic go. Very busy. You can see getting around that roundabout. Now, in 1929, Patrick Gillespie, who was the licensee of the hotel, was charged with having unlawfully supplied liquor on licensed premises at a time prohibited by law. He pleaded guilty. The prosecutor said that Constables Leal and Hanrahan were outside the hotel about 12:30 a.m. Remember, we had 6 o'clock closing then. So I don't know what they were doing, loitering out the front of the hotel at 12:30. They heard someone say, "I'll have a shandy." Even that doesn't ring true to me. If you're going to be drinking illegally, you're not going to be drinking shandy. They got into the hotel through a back door and went through to the bar room where they saw the defendant and 3 other men, so the publican and 3 other men. The publican said that he'd been in bed at 9:30 p.m. when there was a ring at the doorbell. He went down in his pyjamas, and as it was a rough night, he gave way to the appeal of the men for a drink and admitted them. He ended up with a £5 fine with £1 costs. He was trying to do the right. It was a cold night. Now, the Port Hotel is the building on the extreme right of this photograph. Established in 1840 at 25 North Parade between Nelson Street and Commercial Road. Now, on the back of this photograph is written, Port Adelaide, December 25th, 1893, looking at North Parade and Queen's Wharf. Customs House on the left, the Royal Tar at the wharf, about to make her second voyage to Montevideo with New Australian people, sailed January the 1st, 1894. So the New Australians they're referring to, they carried settlers from Australia to Paraguay to form the new colony of New Australia, utopian socialist colony. And it was a three-masted bark of 598 tonnes, and it was the largest colonial ship built right up to the end of the 19th century. A beautiful photograph. This one gives a bit more of a panorama of the port. The Port Hotel is just there on the left-hand side. You can see Port Hotel. And so this photo is from 1951 when an article in the Mail was about its closure and the demolishing of the building, along with other buildings, pubs knocked over for more wharf sheds. You can just imagine the wharfies down there thinking, what's going on? And the Mail said that it was built as a hotel in 1840, and the Port Adelaide itself had grew up around the hotel, and it had 35 licensees since its first. And its name had been changed often. It began as the Cross Knights, that's Knights with a K, was renamed the Red Cross Knight, the Port Hotel, the Port Tavern, and finally just back to the Port Hotel. Today, so that's 1951, there was a road and a wharf between the hotel and the Port River, but in the old days, small boats used to moor to the hotel's veranda posts. The first meeting ever held in South Australia by the Masonic Lodge took place in the port, and it was then the Red Cross Knights. So that was the Mail newspaper, the Sunday Mail, in 1951. The Ship Inn was on the south side of North Parade between Nelson and Mildred Streets, and again established in 1840, destroyed by fire in 1857. Lots of fires happened in the port and rebuilt on the same site. Stopped trading in 1909 when a number of the pubs in Port Adelaide stopped trading. There was it was a referendum about too many hotels in the port, so some of the pubs shut around 1909. For a brief period in the 1840s, it had the great name, the Help Me Through the World Inn. So if anyone's thinking of opening up a new pub, that's a great name for it. I expect to be invited to the launch. In 1923, 14 years after its closure, a local, Mr. William Reid of Peterhead, came to the defence of the old Ship Inn in the letter to the advertiser. And he wrote, I read a paragraph in your issue of Friday last and the new building to be erected on the site of the old Ship Inn. It stated that the inn bore an unsaintly reputation in the old days. I do not know, but possibly some of the old landlord's descendants are still in the land of the living, and it would hurt them to read that remark. I think I can claim to be a fairly old Portonian, and I believe the old Ship Inn was one of the best conducted hotels on the face of the earth. John Smith, who was the landlord from sometime in the 50s to well on towards the 80s, never opened his doors on a Sunday, but was a regular attendant at St. Paul's Church. And he goes on to say, there was a house, meaning a pub fronting Nile Street, which had a very unsaintly reputation. He doesn't say which one that was, curses. It was closed many years ago, fortunately. And he goes on to say, I'm a native of Port Adelaide, 73 years of age, and a non-drinker of intoxicants for 50 years. So I am no hotel keeper's champion, but I do love justice. Some pubs we have quite a few photographs of, others not so many. Right at the end of Commercial Road, this photo dates from 1870 and is the Exchange Hotel, which opened in 1857. And an interesting old figurehead was written about in the register in 1902. Noted here right in the centre of that original building. And here, when the other building was built rebuilt in 1882, and this is an 1885 photograph, and you can just see on the balcony there, on the balcony of the Exchange Hotel, standing firm and erect, is a relic of bygone days. It is a figurehead of a ship representing a Scotch clansman in full dress, holding a gleaming sword in his right hand, while his left supports a shield. His attitude is one of bold defiance. The figure formerly graced the prow of the North American ship, the General Blanco, and is said to be a capital representation of the man after whom the vessel was named. The figurehead was originally standing outside the old Exchange, but on the present building being erected, it was raised to its present position. And this is the hotel from the water in 1912. So you can walk up the steps from catching, I suppose, a taxi, a water taxi across the way. In 1935, the hotel, along with other buildings, was demolished to allow for the widening of the McLaren Wharf, and a new hotel was built slightly to the south and was officially known as the New Exchange from 1941 to 1986. And my uncle ran it from 1979 to 1985. He let me have a schooner. I was only 32. It is now known as the Lighthouse Wharf Hotel. I think it was known as the Lighthouse for quite some time. Now we're going to jump back here. This is the British Hotel. The artist is Samuel Calvert. The British Hotel right there on the corner of North Parade and Nelson Street, where the Birkenhead Bridge comes out. Originally a single story, as you can see here, established in 1847, and it holds the oldest, most continuous licence in the port, although I'm not sure how that fits because it's just closed presently. I have a colleague of mine who lives down that way, she's sitting just at the front there, who checked for me the other day, and the pub is still closed just now. But we're hoping it'll open soon. Here it is, and this is a beautiful photograph, taken in 1890, so the pub is right there in the centre of the photograph, kind of to your left of the yacht, the boat. I'm no expert on that, if it's a yacht or a boat or a ship, but that's what it is. That sailing vessel is just to the left of that. So well before the Birkenhead Bridge. You can imagine the bridge there now, but that wasn't open until 1940. In 1848, the Adelaide Observer had reported that James Wakeling, who was the landlord of the British, appeared on a summons to answer for allowing his pigs to run at large. And he pleaded guilty and was fined 10 shillings. In 1893, the South Australian Chronicle reported an unsuspecting countryman. Now, in the newspapers, it seemed to be a regular thing that if you were down for the country, you seemed to be considered a bit of a bumpkin and you're going to be taken advantage of by the wily city folk. Unfortunately, this gentleman was. Unsuspecting countryman was victimised at Port Adelaide on Tuesday week. He had come from the north and intended to go to Melbourne by steamer, the Barrabool, but was accosted on the wharf by a stranger who, after some conversation, said he intended to go to Sydney by the same steamer and invited his victim for a drink. The two companions adjourned to the British Hotel and had drinks together, but what happened afterwards the countryman was unable to say. He called at the police station in the evening in a muddled condition, evidently suffering severely from the effects of drink, and complained that he'd been robbed of between £20 and £30, which in 1893 is a substantial sum. But he was unable to account for the loss beyond saying he'd had drinks at the British. He lost his passage on the Barrabool and was unable to give a description even of his companion, which might lead to that fellow's arrest. Now, this is the Australian Clubhouse Hotel circa 1877. It can be seen in the centre of the photograph, just showing when the Jervois Bridge is being constructed, but I'll just blow it up for you here. The hotel was known as the Australian Clubhouse from its establishment in 1869 to 1888, then the Australasian Clubhouse, and known as the SA Clubhouse thereafter. And in his book, Hotels and Publicans in South Australia, Bob Hode writes, the Australian Clubhouse was originally in a galvanised iron building known locally as the sardine tin. And on the left-hand side there, you can see the Jervois Bridge in the middle, and then the pub's on the left-hand side. It's on a vacant block now, and I was just driving down there, I think it was on the weekend, and I pointed to where it used to be, and I said to my wife, "That's where the clubhouse used to be," and she rolled her eyes, because every time I go past a place where it used to be a pub, I just feel I have to tell her. In 1926, when this photograph was taken, there was a headline, "Saved from Death, Rescued in Port River." Diving from the railing of the Jervois Bridge this afternoon, Mr A.J. Macaulay, who was the licensee of the Clubhouse Hotel, rescued Mr Robert Hunter, who was in difficulties in the water. This is the second occasion in less than a month that Hunter had been saved from the Port River. He was arrested when brought ashore today and will appear in the police court on a charge of drunkenness. Mr Macaulay was at his hotel about 2 o'clock when told by a lad that a man was in the river, and he rushed out of the hotel onto the bridge and saw Mr Hunter midstream, slightly below the surface. And diving into the water fully clothed, he succeeded in swimming with Hunter, who was a heavy man, to the piling near the bridge and supported him there until a boat was secured. Now, on getting ashore, Mr Macaulay found that a wallet containing diamond rings valued by him at £600 had worked out of his trousers pocket, and a number of banknotes were safe in his pocket, although sodden with water. Now, Mr Bert Harris of Glanville offered to dive for the jewellery and succeeded in recovering the diamonds after a short time. It's kind of a miracle, really. It's reported here the river is about 25 feet deep at the place and very muddy at the bottom. Mr Macaulay considered it that he was very lucky in getting the rings back again. I'm glad he did. So he rewarded Mr Harris with £10. Now, Mr Macaulay seemed like a very brave man, so only 2 years before he received a medal from the Royal Humane Society for his involvement in the rescue of crewmen from the steamer the City of Singapore, which blew up in the port and actually led to the death of 3 firemen fighting the fire. Now, in the centre here of this photograph in 1964, we've got the Globe Hotel, photographed by Michael Lockley. You see those great, I'll just go back a sec. You can see on the deli there, you've got Peter's Ice Cream, you've got Amscol Ice Cream, that's even better. And you've got the Ozone Cinema further down the road there too. So sometimes I've had to zoom into some of these photographs. That's the only photo I could find of the Globe. Established as the Carpenter's Arms in 1850, but destroyed by fire in 1865. Rebuilt and renamed the Globe until about 1981, when it became the Golden Port Tavern. And the building survives, but it's not operated as a hotel. In fact, when I was down there the other day pointing at it to my wife, it looks as though some work's just about to get started again. In 1910, James McCulloch, a fireman, was charged with having stolen at December 31st, a bird cage containing a cockatoo, the property of C.W. Dilks, who was the licensee of the Globe Hotel. Dilks said he missed the bird and the cage from his back veranda on New Year's Eve, and earlier in the evening he'd observed the defendant talking to the bird. Detective Burford said he had accosted the defendant in Todd Street at about 11:45 p.m. McCulloch took him on board the Kananawa and produced a cockatoo and cage, which he said he had bought for 10 shillings. Mr. Dilks, who was present, said, "That's my bird." McCulloch, when charged in caution, made no statement, but in court he contradicted himself to such an extent that the court intimated that he was satisfied as to its guilt. And he was fined £2 and ordered to pay 15 shillings. During the progress of the case, the cockatoo aroused the merriment of the onlookers by glancing at each witness and asking, "Who are you? Who are you?" They reported in great detail, and you can just imagine perhaps newspapers of today not going into quite so much detail, unfortunately. Now, this is a glorious photo of the port in 1885 by a gentleman known as Samuel Sweet, Captain Samuel Sweet. And we have a lot of photographs of his in our collection, many of the port, but also other parts of South Australia. And the reason I've brought this one out is the Colac Hotel, kind of centre right of the photograph in the background there. The Colac was established in 1882 and it was bought by the Australian Labor Party in the 1970s, but ceased trading in 2011. And the building survives, and in a good news story, it has just reopened with some additions. And here's another photograph with the pub on the left there, with a gentleman contemplating his life choices overlooking at Dot 1. This is 1922, but in 1937, 2 Swedish seamen were committed for trial. Jointly charged with having broken into the Colac Hotel at the corner of Santo Parade and St Vincent Street and stolen 14 bottles of whiskey, 3 bottles of wine, 7 packets of cigarettes, 40 cigars, Stig Gustafsson, he could only be Swedish really, Stig Gustafsson, 21, and a youth aged 11, both Swedish seamen off the Paraculla, appeared before the Port Adelaide Juvenile Court. Constable Sutherland said in evidence that with Constable Martin he boarded the overseas motor ship Paraculla, questioned the youth, who showed the officers a case which contained 11 bottles of whiskey and wine and the packets of cigarettes and cigars. They admitted, the youth admitted visiting the Colac Hotel about midnight on Sunday, and also admitted being in the youth's company, but added that he was too drunk to remember what happened. But he realised where all the whiskey was. The magistrate committed each of the defendants for trial. So the Paraculla left Port Adelaide without them on it, but no report I could find was made as to their punishment. And also down the end of the port was the Wharf Hotel. Here it is in another Samuel Sweet photograph, 1885. The Wharf Hotel was right at the end of Todd Street on the south corner of the McLaren Parade, established in 1853. The photo is described as from the east side of the South Australian Company Basin. The Robinson Swing Bridge is at the centre of the photograph. This photo is from 1926. In the news, when the hotel ceased trading in 1949, it was demolished in that year, and the news reported the Wharf Hotel at port to close. So the first of 5 Port Adelaide hotels acquired by the SA Harbours Board, so like the Port Hotel as well, to make room for extra wharf sheds will close Saturday week. It is the Wharf Hotel, one of the oldest in Port Adelaide. Sailors from abroad have repeatedly said the Wharf Hotel was the only hotel in the world having a wharf and a train line at the front door and another train line at the back door. I suppose it's good to be famous for something. And the Waterside Workers Federation said the union was most concerned about the pulling down of waterfront hotels and would consider submitting a tender for the pub's licence to see if they could open up a men's club for their members. Like any port around the world, there were sometimes moral panics about what went on in Port Adelaide. But a letter to the Daily Herald in 1914 from John Arthur, who was the publican of the Railway Hotel, seen here on the corner of Lipson Street and St Vincent Street. His letter was in answer to a controversy related to statements made by the Catholic Archbishop and even the Governor. This one's I'll read the full letter because he's got some great opinions. The letter was entitled A Publican's Views. I have read with a great deal of interest the letters in your paper regarding the morals of Port Adelaide. Letters have come from all classes of the community except hotel keepers. Being a hotel keeper in Port Adelaide, I would like to give my experience of hotel life in the port. Biased readers might shun the idea of tolerating anything a publican says. The man in the street, however, knows the world, and he would soon believe a publican. Very few of your correspondents appear to know the world or the habits or customs of a busy port. Permit me to point out that I have had a little experience in these matters, and I know what I'm speaking about. I've had several hotels in this state, and since I've been in Port Adelaide, my task has been an easy one. I've met a large number of people of all classes, conditions and nationalities, and representing both stationary and travelling populations. No one has caused any trouble, and I cannot speak too highly of this busy port. What struck me most was the absence of women frequenting the hotels. At Port Adelaide, we don't get a tenth of women visitors that we have in the city. I can't speak too highly of our police. Perhaps at times they appear to be too anxious to do their duty, but I've never seen them shirk their work or tolerate any unseemly conduct, either by male or female. I have visited the wharfs morning, noon and night and seen little companies waiting for ships to come in with the object of obtaining work. I've watched these men playing a game of euchre at times, but not gambling, as some narrow-minded people would infer. As for two-up, I have not yet seen such a game on the Port Adelaide wharfs. So there you have it. Nothing untoward was ever going on in Port Adelaide. The railway was established in 1856 and closed in 2021, but the building still stands, I'm pleased to say. Now, I have to say that there's a lot of pubs, both in North Adelaide and Port Adelaide, I haven't spoken about. So wait for next year. Other port pubs, at least, I haven't spoken about. The beautiful Royal Arms in 1928 on the corner of St Vincent Street and Todd Street. The Port Dock on Todd Street. Portland in the 1990s. And here's an interesting one. We're going back to that Robinson Swing Bridge, and looking over Dock 1, we can see the Criterion Hotel where that sign says hotel, strangely enough. This is in about 1932, I think. There's actually two Criterion hotels in this photo. The one on the left, which was built in 1932, and the other one's obscured by the Swing Bridge, established in 1879. There's one other pub too, the Port Anchor, formerly the Kent, which is on Church Street, of which the library doesn't have an old photograph of. Now, there's the Birkenhead Tavern on the right-hand side there. Now, I suppose you'd say it's not technically in Port Adelaide, but it's just a lovely photo taken again by our former photographic archivist, Jenny Scott, taken in 1986. Nice to get a bit of colour in as well. The Prince's Hotel was on the corner of North Parade and Mundy Street. You can see Hart's Mill there as a point of reference in this 1865 photo. The Prince opened in 1851 and ceased trading in 1909 like those other pubs. Originally a single story, it was rebuilt in 1875. This is a 1909 photograph showing the bustling port, and the hotel is kind of front and centre, just where the words Port Adelaide are written, just how busy the port was. Now, it took me a little searching for images of the Britannia, later known as the Dockside Tavern. This photo is taken in 1863. There's a bit of a blow-up of it right there in the centre. And again, on the left-hand side near the wharf sheds, and I'll just blow it up again. So just on the right of that little circle bit there. In 1935, it was closed for a little while, but now it's now known as the Chow Baby Pizza Pub. How times have changed. I'm sure the old wharf workers would have liked a bit of pizza with their beer, but I'm not sure they could even dream about the name of the hotel of the old dockside. And now, perhaps the saddest story of all, the little pub that couldn't. This modest building was the proposed Beltana Hotel on the corner of North Parade and Hare Street, near where the Port Adelaide TAFE was. And S. Wills attempted to gain a licence for the premises, but as reported in the Register in 1871 before the licensing court, Beltana Hotel, Port Adelaide, opposition by the inspector and Messrs Yeo, owner of the Port Admiral, and Russell, owner of the nearby British Hotel, that the house was not required. And the Beltana never poured a beer. Thank you for coming today. That's it from me. I would like to acknowledge the work of Bob Hode, whose book, The Hotels and Publicans in South Australia, which was published in 1999, is really the pub Bible. So if you're interested in any sort of pub history or even family history, you can come in and consult that book with us. I will also point out that most of those photographs you can see via the State Library catalogue. So just go to our catalogue, put in whichever is your favourite hotel, and hopefully, unless it's the Port Anchor, we'll have a photograph of it. And I would also like to remind you that our talks are available to be viewed via our website. So just check the stories page and you'll see there. So if you're interested, you can see my talk from last year. I believe it's the highest rated one so far. And there's also lots of other content about the library's collections and South Australian stories. And also keep an eye on our What's On. There's our logo, that's what I wanted to show. And also keep an eye on our What's On page for upcoming events and exhibitions. So thanks everyone for coming, and since it's after 12 o'clock, you can go for a drink. If anyone's got any questions or stories or whatever, last time I gave a talk, invariably there was one gentleman who was brought up in a hotel in the city of Adelaide, and he told me all about SP bookmaking. I did learn a lot from him. So anyway, thanks for coming.